Thank you all so much for being here. I have these lights focusing on me right now, so I don't see any of you. I'm just seeing the lights. But I'll talk as if you're all there. I think you are. Anyway, so again, delighted to that you were all able to join us here for the third annual Convergence and the Future of Research Conference at Discovery Park. You might be wondering, some of you may have been here for previous conferences, some of you may not. What do we mean by convergence? We mean by convergence really the intersection of multiple disciplines, multiple technologies, multiple approaches that come together to solve big, global, grand challenge type problems. And that's really, if you want, what defines Discovery Park. That's what the center directors and the institute directors and the faculty affiliated with Discovery Park are passionate about. And that's what we're trying to celebrate here today. Last year, we had 4 or 5 outstanding speakers that came from outside the university to talk to us about various emerging technologies and how the convergence of those technologies was solving problems in different areas. This year, we wanted to bring together a group of faculty leaders and faculty teams that are working on what we call the Big Idea Challenge. The Big Idea Challenge was born about 2 years ago. The idea behind that was born about 2 years ago in conversations here within Discovery Park and with faculty, with deans. And it was a very simple notion. It was how can we incentivize truly interdisciplinary teams of faculty and students to come together, new teams to form, to nucleate, to come together with a big idea that will have a significant societal impact on a grand challenge that we face as a planet in the 21st century. And we asked faculty, through a request for proposals, to bring us those ideas. And one of the conditions was that to participate in this program, you had to bring a team together that wasn't just a collection of your peers from your own discipline or near disciplines. By that I mean, if you had 3 engineers working together from different disciplines of engineering, that was not the interdisciplinary team we were looking for. We were interested in how you were going to bring the social sciences, the humanities, the liberal arts faculty and students into the problem so that we could take a holistic look at the problem you're trying to solve and really advance knowledge, advance scholarship, advance innovation to tackle that problem and be able to make Purdue sort of the famous centerpiece, in the country to tackle that kind of issue. These teams came together from all across the campus. We had a tremendous amount of proposals that were submitted. I think about 250 faculty participated in those proposals. From all 10 academic colleges, departments all across the campus, into 46 proposals that were submitted. There was a very rigorous selection process. There were presentations, there were papers that were presented, and at the end of that process, 7 projects were chosen. And those 7 projects, which comprise the Big Idea Challenge, receive resources in order to, again, nucleate these teams, bring faculty and students from across the campus together, tackle this problem, and go outside the walls of Purdue, go to the federal agencies, go to philanthropies, go to industry, and position the university, again, to be the leader in solving these kinds of challenges, and bring resources from outside to then be able to take this team beyond the scope of the Big Idea Challenge seed funding and take this team into the future and again, make us the world-class institution in solving these kinds of problems that we are. So that's what we're here to sort of look at today. It's extraordinarily exciting. I have been working with these teams for the last 18 months. We have been following the progress, getting updates, solving problems, bringing people together. And the kind of work that I think you're going to see here today is inspirational. It really, I think, is inspirational and is transformational. I think, I go around the country, I visit a lot of universities. When I talk about this, everybody's jealous. Everybody says, how did you do it? How are you guys doing this? Because we want to do the same thing. And that's rewarding. I think everybody, here on campus at Purdue, not just the teams that participated in this, everybody should be extraordinarily proud of the collaborative environment that exists within this university. There's a DNA on campus that allows and encourages, incentivizes, and brings those collaborations together in ways that, trust me, is hard to find anywhere else. I think this is to the great benefit of the student body at the university, both undergraduates and graduate students that participate in these activities. I think it's to the great benefit of the faculty, of the university, and of the nation and the world, because the challenges that we're tackling through these really convergent interdisciplinary approaches cannot be tackled in any other way, okay? So, I want to, just simply, again, thank the team leaders of these Big Idea Challenge projects for the commitment that they have brought to this idea, for the passion that they have displayed and that they continue to display over the first 18 months and that I know they're going to bring into the future, and really for the tremendous effort, because it takes a lot of effort to get outside your comfort zone, broaden out, talk to people who speak a different language. An anthropologist speaks a very different language from an engineer. Bring those languages together and put in the effort, the time necessary to create a common language that really tackles these issues. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Tom Hertel. Professor Tom Hertel, as you know, is a professor in agricultural economics. And he has built truly a new team, building on things that he has been a world leader for in the past, building on that knowledge, building on that experience. He has put together a new team to tackle something which we all believe is fundamentally critically important for the future, which is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. How do we create the environment, the ecosystem at the planet that is going to facilitate sustainable development in the 21st century and beyond? Critical problem, grand challenge. Tom and his team are addressing this. And Tom, please, we'll let you tell everybody what you've been doing. Thank you.
Well, I just got out of teaching, so thanks for slipping me in here, Tomas. It's a real pleasure to be here to be able to talk about our Big Idea Challenge project. We now have a logo and a name, and it's GLASS, Global to Local Analysis of System Sustainability. And you can see a list of the co-PIs here. We're focused on managing the global commons, and we're particularly interested in sustainable agriculture, sustainable use of the world's land and water resources. As Thomas mentioned, we're very much focused on achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, focused on the well-being of humanity in the year 2030. And if you focus in on these goals, half of them relate directly to land and water resources, and those are the ones that we're focused on in our project. There's been a lot of work done in this area. I'm sure you see and on the internet something every day on this topic, UN Sustainable Development Goals and whatnot. Our analysis going into this project suggested that there were 3 limitations, one or more of which applied to most work in this area. Often it was disciplinary. That's the natural thing for us. For me, coming into this as an economist, you work with other economists and you analyze it from the economic perspective. That's obviously, as we'll see, much too limiting to achieve this kind of analysis and success. Most of the sustainability work done currently is local, and it makes sense that it be local. This piece of land is different from that. The water regulations here are different from somewhere else. The climate differs. So there's a natural tendency to want to analyze this at a very local level, and that's appropriate. The problem is when you only analyze it at a local level, you miss the global context, you miss the feedbacks from local to global. And, the last point is that much of this work is complex, proprietary. It may be done typically in a big government lab, even if they want to share the information, it's very difficult to do. So having an open source approach, I think, is the only way to go here in the long run. So this is our framework, global to local to global. We're very concerned about characterizing global drivers of local stresses and understanding how those will evolve as we move through the 21st century. Once you get to the local level, we want to understand how the stresses that emerge vary by location, by institutions, and so on. And I'll give you an example of that. Finally, we want to capture how the local responses feed back to the global level in many cases. So, as Tomas has indicated, this is fundamentally cross-disciplinary work. That's what the Big Idea project was all about. That's why we assembled this team. It's not easy always to do interdisciplinary work, especially with economists. So they're kind of across this shark-infested water there, and it's hard to link to them often. But if you got a great team, as we do with this Big Idea competition, gave us a chance to put together an excellent team, and they've been terrific. And we've broadened this to include others at many other institutions. So that's, I think, the starting point for success in any of these Big Idea challenges, is to have an excellent team, and doesn't just mean excellent in their disciplines, it means excellent in their ability to work with others and communicate. So I'm going to just give you a few snippets of vignettes of our Big Idea work, some of the findings over the last 2 years. And this will be the order, kind of following the logic of our GLASS project. I'll also conclude talking about the institutional challenge. You may do this project, you may get an NSF grant for another 3 years, 4 years, maybe even 5 years. How do you continue this work beyond that point? That's the challenge we face. So here are the global drivers we're thinking about when we're thinking about the land and water resources. And that is population, just flat out. You get more people, you need more land, you need more water, all else constant. Income. As people become richer, they consume not only more food, but richer diets. They tend to diversify. These tend to be more environmentally demanding in many cases. And then productivity growth. This is the magic bullet, if you can achieve it, for bridging limited resources to these increased future demands. So here's our first insight, and that has to do with, here I've drawn out the example, because we're sitting in the US, or sitting in the Midwest of the US, thinking about US crop production. What is driving US crop production out to mid-century? And it turns out, when you take a close look at this through this global to local lens, that it is no longer US income, US population, it's developments in the rest of the world that are really driving out to mid-century the land and water stresses. So that's the first lesson. You can't just do local analysis, you just can't just do national analysis. You need to have a global perspective to understand the sustainability stresses. This gives you some insight into how varied these sustainability stresses can be from one location to another. So a key part of this global to local analysis is having a fine scale resolution. This is 5 arc minutes, or maybe in the Midwest around 20,000 acres per grid cell. So a lot of grid cells, 75,000 grid cells in fact, that we're trying to track. And each of those has different characteristics and different features, and you can see the sustainability stresses are likely to be not so much where we are here, the potential for increased cropland conversion in Tippecanoe County is modest. We've farmed most of the available land. It's in the marginal areas, and that's where potential for environmental damage is greater. Groundwater is an even bigger challenge, and you can see that when you look at groundwater stress here in many places, Central Valley of California, but also Ocala and Upper Snake, you see withdrawals that are 10 times in excess of recharge rates. So you're rapidly drawing down the groundwater here, And as we project forward, those stresses are accentuated in those very same areas. So now we get into the question of what if you respond to that by limiting groundwater withdrawals? And this slide shows you in our global to local global framework the implications of that. So you say, okay, in the Western US, you can no longer withdraw beyond the recharge rate. This has implications for global markets. It has implications for the location of global crop production, much of it shifting overseas, provided there aren't measures taken overseas of a similar sort, and some movement from west to east. So global to local to global is illustrated there, I think, nicely. I want to talk a little about sustainability solutions and show you the importance of a fine-scale analysis to pinpoint the kind of solutions that, that might be useful to think about. And I'll do this in the context of water quality. So the biggest environmental problem facing agriculture in the Midwest of the US is the excess nutrients that run off the fields, that run through these drainage pipes and into the streams, down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico. And they've created this very large dead zone. And this problem, known as the hypoxia problem, led to an EPA task force that called for a 45% reduction in nitrate leaching in this very area where we're sitting now. So that's a big reduction in environmental pollution. How can one achieve that? What are the consequences? What are the trade-offs in terms of sustainable development goals, impacts on food prices, and other things? So here, these curves vary. These have been fitted by one of our collaborators at Wisconsin. Each grid cell, each production practice has a different curve showing how additional nitrogen generates higher yields, but also increasing leaching. So you can imagine if you cut back the nitrogen use from here to here, you're going to limit yields, you're going to limit output, and boost prices. And you can see if you took the economist approach, that's what I thought of first, let's just charge, put a leaching charge on the nitrogen applications. Well, it has a very big adverse effect on output, and prices go up through the roof. It's also really expensive and would really boost the price of fertilizer for farmers. Are there other solutions, and are there solutions that might have particular local characteristics? So one of those we've looked at is controlled drainage, and this is led by Laura Bowling in agronomy. This is one of several conservation practices we've looked at that can be paired with the economist solution and achieve the same reduction with much less adverse impact on output. Of course, where you can do this, you can't do this everywhere. You need this kind of this drainage structure to begin controlling it. And so you need the fine-scale resolution to know where these can be placed, to know the consequences, and to read out the impacts on national and global markets. So solutions vary very much by locality. Institutional challenges, I want to close by talking about the institutional challenges in keeping this work going and expanding it and having it realize its full potential. So we're working very much around the GeoHub. That's an instance of Purdue's Hub Zero. This is a Purdue-based project led by Carol Song. You'll see her picture in a moment. And our activities are revolving around this GeoHub as a place to establish this community of practice. Here's some illustrations of how this works. This is the landing page. Here's Carol, who's just landed another 5-year NSF project to continue building this, and we're one of the important use cases on the GeoHub. So you can see some examples of the studies done here under glass. This is the modeling framework we're using. That is available. So remember, one of the key limitations was most of this work is not available for others to build on. Well, you can not only run this on the GeoHub, you can modify the model, you can replicate that and extend it. So it's a good place for modeling collaboration to take place. It's a good place for publishing your data and maps and comparing the results. And it's a place for policy briefs. And you'll see on the next slide, we held an event at the National Press Club in September where these policy briefs were presented and the results were demonstrated and further explored through the GeoHub. So that's another key part of this is analysis of the trade-offs and synergies. And here are some photos from our National Press Club event in DC in September. We had a mix of people from the private sector, NGOs, public sector, academics. We had the fertilizer industry sitting next to Environmental Defense Fund, sitting next to EPA, sitting next to a farmer. And this is glass in China. So we've also secured a project, so that totally emerged from one of our monthly meetings. Matt Huber said, hey, let's apply for this thing, this NSF US-China initiative, and we won, and we are in the process of helping them develop a glass framework there. This is our participation at a workshop, running a workshop at a conference in University of Michigan on sustainability. So where are we going in the future? GlassNet is the concept of now we're thinking about tying the set of networks together under this glass. This actually idea came out of our press club event when some NSF program director was there and said, hey, you should apply for this program. Well, it hasn't even been announced, but it was announced, and we're preparing a proposal that would integrate a variety of international networks, GTAP based at Purdue, Natural Capital Project based at Stanford, looking at ecosystem services, AgMIP, climate change, and PopGrid, based in Columbia Earth Institute and looking at population. And so the idea of combining these networks under the GeoHub is something that's been very appealing to these groups. We'll be meeting tomorrow to kind of to flesh out this proposal to NSF for XLNet, a 5-year proposal bringing these networks together to help further build out this community of practice. And finally, we need some architecture that can help sustain this over time, and this is what we're thinking of right now. It's been evolving as we go, but the stakeholder advisory group will be critical in this process. Like many of the people involved in the press club event would be providing their input. We'd have project leadership and lots of kinds of engagement and a way to engage the broader global community. So this would be a way to carry this on beyond the 5 years of the XLNet into the future in perpetuity in some sense, as long as these stakeholders are willing to support this project. So that's our vision. The big idea thing catalyzed all of this, really. We would not have been doing this without the big idea competition. It challenged us to think big, to pursue some of these things, and yeah, I'm grateful, Thomas. Thank you.
Let's see. Thank you, Tom.
Yep.
Terrific. It's great to see the progress and great to see the global impact of these kinds of activities that are nucleating right now. So we have time for a few questions. At the end, we're going to have a panel discussion with all the speakers with more opportunity for questions and discussion. But let's take some time. Any questions for Tom that the audience? I can't
overwhelmed, huh?
Gary.
So Tom, thank you for the presentation. I noticed that the focus was on U.S. agriculture, right? Its global impact and vice versa. Thanks. And I wanted to ask you if you looked at any impacts in developing countries in Africa, Latin America, or Asia, and look at their impact on U.S. agriculture and vice versa.
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So when we started this, we thought of the world evenly divided in these what are half-degree grid cells. So more coarse resolution, but covering the world. And our first papers published in this area took that perspective, and we looked at things like water scarcity that would emerge across the world and thinking about how these play back and forth. Then we went for funding, and we went to U.S. agencies, and we realized to get funding from them, we need to focus on the U.S., and it had the advantage of being able to do finer scale resolution. So the way we're going forward now overseas is more like partnering with the Chinese, in this case, under the NSF. Now, I've just received an email earlier this week from Embrapa in Brazil. They were on campus. Someone had them here on campus, and they've gotten very excited about glass for Brazil. So I think the way we'll proceed in engaging the developing countries will be engaging with groups from those countries who have the expertise. This geospatial data is pretty heavy, and getting access to it can be a challenge, especially places like China. So I think having the local partnership will be important, but that's very much our vision, is that this interplay occurs in many other countries. It's more interesting than in the US because they're growing more rapidly, they're transforming. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Tom. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
That was great, as usual. So I guess I wanted to maybe just ask you to say a little bit more. I appreciated your willingness to, is this still working? Hello?
It's okay. Yeah,
Your willingness to reject the economist solution, right, when you talked about those, the nitrogen graphs that you showed, right, and the loss of yield. I'll say so as a political scientist, not an economist. When I looked at that graph, I said, wow, so here is actually a trivial reduction in yield when you look at the amount of nitrogen that is required, right, to get that it's the last 10% problem, right, which is in so many policy settings. So, okay, fair enough. So you're saying, so we shouldn't be, right, asking farmers to pay for the costs of that it's cheaper to install, right, this technology that does these clever things to reduce, right, which is great technology, by the way, right, to reduce the runoff from those fields. But I guess I'd invite you to say a little bit more about that graph and really what is going on that makes it economical or even sensible, right, for farmers to use that much additional input, right, to get that little as a relative percentage, right, increase in yield. Like, I feel like that's a really important part of the story you're trying to tell, and you kind of blew by that. So if you don't mind saying a couple words about that.
That's a great question. So, I mean, I certainly believe that in the best possible worlds, people should pay the full cost of any input they use, anything they consume. And the full cost of nitrogen fertilizer is a lot higher than people are paying in the market now. So as a result, the increase, 130% increase in nitrogen price would be, well, when I first started talking about that, preparing the policy brief, there's a lot of back and forth. I mean, that was clearly a non-starter with pretty much every stakeholder I interacted with, and they said no to the conservation technology. So we were drawn to that. We started there, we were drawn into this other area, and Laura's expertise allowed us to explore it. Why are they way out here on the production function, or the Gompertz curve there? Well, nitrogen's cheap. Some would argue that farmers are over-applying nitrogen fertilizer, and that is, in some of the studies that have been done in Iowa, that's their first line of defense. They're saying, convince people to cut back because they're over-applying. And, you know, economists always are a bit wary of people saying the farmers are irrational. I mean, but there are a number of long-term studies USDA is funding right now to try to understand that better. So field trials. Let's do it. Let's experiment and see whether they are overapplying. But that's a very good question, and many people have concluded the first thing is to convince farmers that they're overapplying. You can see the leaching relationship. A little bit of N reduction gets you a long way in terms of reducing leaching.
Right.
Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? The students has a question?
Marshall?
Marshall is now a student.
Just a brief comment.
Always a student.
That I was in a meeting yesterday where we're looking at the role of sulfur working with nitrogen to enhance protein content in soybeans, for example. Mm-hmm. And there's a program been underway for about 10 years in the state. A lot of agencies working together, from commodity groups to the conservation groups and others. And they're discovering that with the Clean Air Act, we have done a good job of reducing some of the pollution from our power plants, namely sulfur being one of them, to the point we don't have enough on the crop now, so we're having to go back and apply it. So there's some interesting interplays here across the policies.
This is a really important point. Let me say that nitrous oxide is an important greenhouse gas emission, and the controlled drainage could exacerbate that by holding the water, and some of it may go to the atmosphere. So it's complicated, and we haven't addressed all the complexity. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was fantastic.
Yeah. No, my pleasure. Yeah. Yeah.